Welcome to Pacific Mammal Research's Marine Mammal Highlight Series. We are a 501c3 research and education nonprofit studying marine mammals in the Salish Sea off Washington State. In this series, you will learn about different marine mammals as we discuss interesting facts about each species. This is our way to geek out, share some information, and have some fun. We hope you enjoy the series, and be sure to follow us on Instagram to vote for which animal we talk about next. And without further ado, welcome to the PacMam podcast. I'm Cindy.
And I'm Pat.
And we thank you guys for voting this week on our Marine Mammal Highlight. This is our first Marine Mammal Highlight of 2023. Woo-hoo! And I'm very excited because the one that won, we've put up like 3 or 4 times, I think.
Yeah, it's been quite a few rounds.
Quite a few, at least maybe 2 or 3. It feels more sometimes. And he loses every time. And but this time it won. It was between the Weddell seal and the New Zealand fur seal. And finally the Weddell seal won. So
yay!
And in convincing fashion, it was like 70 to 30%, something like that. So it was a landslide. So good job, Weddell seal, and for them. They're actually, there's some really cool stuff about these guys. So we're excited to get into that. So just a quick note, don't forget that we do have a subscription version of the podcast now, which has no ads. And we're going to have little mini episodes of various topics and things to available to subscribers only. So please subscribe to that, and it helps us be able to keep giving you this cool information and do our research. So we appreciate it in advance for all your subscribers. And the link should just be in the show notes. Should be a little button. All right, so with that, let's get into these adorable Weddell seals and where
cute.
they are at and what they look like.
Yeah, so they are super cute. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm sure we'll have a little picture of them up, but they're basically seal loaves. I mean, they're just like little heads on these huge big bodies, and they're so cute. Anyway, okay, so we'll get into it. Were you going to say something?
I was going to say, there's a quote. It says, "It has been said that the Weddell seal's appearance is as if someone made a mistake while putting the animal together because its head is so small compared to its body."
Oh my gosh, I love it.
Isn't that great?
That's awesome. That's awesome. Oh man. Okay, so since we're already talking about what they look like, maybe I'll do their appearance first, and then we'll get into where they live. So these are pretty large, bulky seals with a relatively small head, as we just said, and they have a short, wide snout. So they do have, they are true seals. They don't have any ear flaps. And they do have more of that kind of more spaniel-like profile. The adults are dark gray to brown with dark and light patches on the ventral side. So the underside, and the silvery white dorsal side. So the top of them. So again, if you think about, this will make sense when we get into where they live, because these are ice seals. So that's really, really good for blending in with their environment. And the pups are born light gray with occasionally golden fur, which I think would be really cool to see.
I thought it was like golden. I'm like, that's
yeah,
kind of an offshoot coloration.
Yeah, it's really neat. So another thing that is relatively small compared to their body is their front flippers. So this just makes me think of T-Rex arms, right?
Oh, yeah,
where they
absolutely.
have like smaller front flippers than you would expect given their actual size.
And I think like all seals have that compared to sea lions, but I think these guys are like, because their bodies are so massive, it's even more pronounced.
It's more pronounced for sure. Yeah. So speaking of size, the males can grow up to about 9 to 9.5 feet and 800 to 900 pounds, almost up to 1,000 pounds. And the females are slightly bigger and heavier. So they're actually growing up to around 10 to 11 feet in length and reaching over 1,100 pounds. So the females are a little bit bigger, and their weight does, I'm sure you'll get into, Cindy, but their weight does fluctuate dramatically throughout the season because they are pupping and lactating and all of the things. So,
and it's related to how well they can feed their pups, which we'll get into.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, makes total sense. So in terms of where they live, these guys are Antarctic seals. So they inhabit most of the Southern Ocean. They're typically found on near shore fast ice. So other Antarctic seals actually prefer the pack ice. So these guys are a little bit odd in that they can be found on the pack ice, but they're mostly in that near shore fast ice area.
And so I had to refresh my memory because fast always sounds to me like it should be the stuff that's free floating in a way because it's fast, but it's not. It's held fast to the land. So for those of you who don't know what fast ice versus pack ice is, fast ice is these large ice sheets that are basically attached to the land, and then the pack ice are these more smaller chunks that are kind of more free floating.
Right, floating out in the ocean, basically. Yes, thank you for that. So this is basically right up to those Antarctic shorelines. And like I said, they can be found on that offshore pack ice. It just depends on the season and the ice limits, as you might expect. And basically, they're found at many of the islands along the Antarctic Peninsula. There's apparently a consistent population on South Georgia. But especially some of these islands that are seasonally free of ice as well, they will be found there. And they have documented some vagrant animals in South America, New Zealand, and even Southern Australia, which if you look at the Southern Ocean, like Southern Australia is really far up from the Antarctic. So
yeah, that's a pretty far swim. That's crazy.
Yeah. So these guys can move, even though they're mostly in that Southern Ocean area, they can be found elsewhere.
And that's interesting too, because them being ice seals, you wouldn't expect them if we're talking about climate change and that changing distributions, you wouldn't expect them to go farther north. You'd expect them to go farther south. So
right. But as we've spoken about in other episodes, we do have these random animals who are, who knows what their drivers are, but animals that should be in Arctic, like with the walrus who was hanging out off of Wales, like typically a walrus should not be in temperate waters, and yet there we are. So
there's that beluga that was down by California. So.
Exactly. So they like to roam occasionally, but yeah, that is what they look like. I highly recommend going and just Googling a quick image search of Weddell seals, because they are adorable. And they are genuinely like very, very pretty seals too. So
yes, they are. And they are the most southern marine
getting into my fun fact already.
Yeah. I was just good because it went along with their distribution.
That's fine.
Oh, okay. Well, now I'm going to say it wrong. So, the southernmost breeding population of mammals on Earth.
Yeah.
Which is crazy.
Yeah.
I was like, there's got to be something more southern. What are you talking about? I'm like, well, and as we'll get into with the research and stuff, everything's done on McMurdo. Like almost all the research is based out of McMurdo. So, it's pretty far down there.
Yeah. So that is what they look like and where they live.
Cool. Excellent. Well, then I will go ahead and go into the behavior and diet and reproduction. So what's kind of interesting is that we know more about this species than any other Antarctic species. Like it's the most well-known. And I'll get into when we get to the newer research, but there's a long-term study that's been going on down by the McMurdo Station for a very long time. So that's partly why we know so much about them. But that they didn't really explain why, other than they have that long-term station. But like,
I was going to say, I didn't really see anything that was explaining why that was, other than perhaps the other thing that I would imagine is because they are on that near shore fast ice, they can actually be more easily observed from land versus like having to go into the ocean on a vessel or some sort of ship or drone.
That is true. Yeah.
So they might be a little bit more easily observed as well.
Yeah. And I'll get into that too a little bit too, but they're not scared of people. Like they don't care. Like there's videos of them just like walking right up to a female and her pup, and she's like, "Yo, what's up?" They just doesn't really care. So and they are able to tag the pups and everything. So that is probably another reason that they're not really scared of people. So it's easier to research.
Right. They don't flee. Yeah.
Yeah. Flush out. So as you already said, they like that fast ice, but they can stay. But that is where they are in the pack ice versus the fast ice depends on their age. So they will stay year round in the pack ice as they're floating around. But then once they have to choose a colony when they become mature. They go, I'm going to pup at this colony, and then they're actually have a high site fidelity to that. So so they hang out in the pack ice and they go, I choose you. And then they go to that, and then they're found at that particular location for the most part. I think their whole life, as far as I know.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that.
Yeah, they have quite strong site fidelity to their original whatever pupping beach there, not beach, it's not a beach.
So that's what I was just going to say. So do they, when you say they choose a colony, do they typically stay at the colony that they were pupped at? Or do we not
So
know?
it's not, I couldn't find where if they said that the pups came back to the same one. They just said
Okay.
they usually stay at the same pupping colonies each year. So once they choose, but they
Right.
do have, and I'll get into that with the research. They do have in that near the McMurdo station, data for decades on pups and where they go every year. So I'm sure they might have it, but I didn't see any published accounts of like they come to the
Okay.
same pupping thing. So
Yeah, I just was curious.
yeah, and it also just said adult seals usually stay at the same pupping colonies each year, and I don't know if
Mm.
that means both sexes, right? Because the
Mm-hmm.
males um, stay around to get with the females, so maybe they also choose the same ones. I don't know.
Interesting.
Maybe they don't know. Yeah, I'm not sure. So once they pick their little places to pop out at, oh, and they have really cool. They have modified front teeth to maintain ice holes, which
Mm-hmm.
I meant
Isn't
to
that
look up
nifty?
to see if I could find a picture of it, but I ran out of time when I was researching. I was like, that's gonna be kind of cool. Like use your teeth as ice picks.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty crazy. But they do need those because they need to be able to breathe and have little holes when they go down to dive. They can stay down for quite a bit of time, but
Mm-hmm.
pardon my cat. She's deciding to walk all over me. So they let's see. They so we're in the southern hemisphere, so everything's opposite. So in summer, we're talking about the winter, our winter, right? So
Right. The austral
um
summer.
right, austral summer. So they will the females haul out for pupping in September in the northern areas. And then as you get farther south, it's later in the year, more into summer, right? Which makes sense. October, November to give birth. So, and then they will, basically after they give birth is when they molt. So they'll molt from December to March, and they'll spend a fair amount of time outside of there. So just a quick reminder, molting is they shed their fur and get a nice new coat. They have a low predation rate, mainly because they're inaccessible.
Right. Which I'll get into that in the threats too, as
Okay,
to some more about predation
perfect.
and
I will leave out
what
then
is hunting them.
who the occasional predators are. I'll leave that for you. But it makes sense, right? Since they're on that fast ice, it's harder for particularly marine predators to be able to grab them versus the pack ice.
Mm-hmm. And bear in mind, we are in the Antarctic, so we don't have things like polar bears there that would be a threat if they were in the Arctic, for example.
Right. I have a friend, Grace, who gets very upset whenever there's kids' books and they have penguins and polar bears in the same place. She's like, okay, she gets way more upset about it than I do, and I'm a marine mammalogist, so kind of funny. But that's true, right? They're not in the same place. So I will also mention that they are highly vocal. You can, and they're so loud, you can hear them at the surface. If they're calling underwater, you can hear them at the surface, which it would be really also creepy because you're like in the Antarctic, right? And say it was like
Yeah.
dusk, and you and if you listen, like I highly recommend listening to the sounds. I'll put some links to sounds in the show notes. They're really freaky sounding. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's like
They sound like alien sounds, like truly. They sound like a 60s alien movie.
yeah, no, totally. It's
Mm-hmm.
like it's like
It's
some
very
alien
cool.
ships coming.
Very cool.
Yeah. And so they don't I couldn't really find that much more about their vocalizations besides that kind of cool fact. They have trills, whistles, low frequency buzzes, and chirps. And I think they either know or they assume that it's males that are doing it during the breeding season. So it's likely some kind of vocal display. And males will, which is kind of cool, the males will maintain underwater territories under cracks in the ice with access to several females. So I'm just imagining this really cool thing with these males underneath and they're like making all these crazy sounds and like that's their like they have like a little cordoned off like this is my section, these are my females above me, but I'm down here.
Right. Patrolling down below.
Right. below, but
Yeah.
like the females are like, that's right, my man's underneath the ice, and he's gonna. It's just such a different. It's like the same thing as many sea lions do, where they have harems, but they're up on the land, being able to defend that, but they're doing this underwater, as presumably by sound. I don't think that they really attack much or anything.
Yeah.
So, just kind of a cool, different way of doing things. So I'm actually going to get into, since we're talking about reproduction, do that, and then I'll do their diet. But the sexually mature females from about 3 to 6, and males from 7 to 8 years. Pretty common for males to be a little bit later in a lot of mammal species. We already talked about the babies, but they have those crazy gray, brown, golden, but they will molt that after about 6 weeks. So they have that cute little color for 6 weeks, and they nurse for about 5 to 6 weeks. But the pup will start going in the water with mom as early as 2 weeks and start learning how to swim. And there's some cute videos at some of the websites that we'll have on our references. The seals just like, and just flopping into the water. But in that nursing for 5 to 6 weeks, they can gain 200 pounds.
Wow.
Yeah. And this is common for, the shorter the lactation time, the faster you have to pump up. And I'll talk about that in a little when I talk about the new research as well. But it's important to gain that weight, because once the mom leaves, then the pup is there for a couple of weeks just sitting on the ice and just hanging out, and they're not feeding. So they need, the more weight they have, the better chance they have of surviving that weaning period, or the fasting period. So it's good to be fat for a seal.
Yep, especially if you live in the Antarctic.
Right. And luckily, they, unlike other seals and other, land babies, because they have such a remote habitat, and like I said, there's no polar bears and other like things like that, they have reduced mortality rate for pups. So that's a good thing for them. They have the ability to survive a little bit better than other animals, other babies, which most mammal species have a mortality rate of about 25% in the first year. So it's pretty rough the first year for most animals. So their diet, they are general feeders, but their main food is fish. Foosh? Did I just say foosh?
Their main foosh? I like it.
I was saying fish and cod. I'm not sure.
I think you're saying their main food is fish, but
there we go. That's it. Foosh. I put food and fish together. That's right. It's foosh. I like it. That's my new word. Is Antarctic cod and Antarctic silverfish, particularly silverfish. That's what I saw in a lot of diet studies. And they'll occasionally eat some cephalopods and some crustaceans, and some were even observed eating chin-strap penguins.
Wow, interesting.
Yeah, and that's all I could find in it. They like one place was just like, and sometimes I do that. I was like, what?
Right, one of those weird things that they've observed maybe, but they haven't seen it enough to really be able to study it.
Right, and like maybe that's like there's some vagrant guy that's just like, I love penguins.
Right, or was it in a year when there was particularly low food elsewhere?
Right, they're just trying to get something. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yeah. And I think there was one study, and I'm not going to talk about this part of it, but I think their distribution was negatively correlated with emperor penguins. So they like weren't near areas with penguins. So probably because there's competition and other things, and I don't know, maybe penguins don't like them. So young seals, because they're in the pack ice, you remember they're hanging out there before they pick their pupping place. The young seals there depend more on pelagic prey, so a bit deeper waters and prey that's down deep compared to adults. They have done some really cool studies because they've been studying these guys for so long. They put videos on their heads, and they have those cool video and like D tags that can do movement and all that kind of stuff. And they found that they're very, very stealthy. They can approach a cod within like a centimeter without startling a fish.
Wow.
Yeah. Just imagine that. That's like all of a sudden you just look back and there's a seal just there. That's it.
Wow, that's so cool.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's like owls, right? That don't have any, that you can't hear them. So they're like that. They're the owls of the Antarctic. And they don't use sound to hunt. They're very, very, very good underwater fishing. And then I like this part. They use the under ice surface for backlighting.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. And I just say backlighting, I always think photographs. So I'm like, oh, they're taking a nice photograph of the backlighting. but I guess the light coming through allows them to see things better, I suppose. If maybe they go down and then look up, and so therefore.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, they're probably using that as to see the shadow of the fish.
Exactly. So smart. No?
Mm-hmm.
They also will use air. So if there's smaller fish, they'll blow air bubbles into sub-ice crevices and startle the fish out so we can get to it.
Oh, cool.
Kind of using like a little tool. Excuse me. So they can hold their breath for a long time. They can stay submerged for up to 73 minutes, which is pretty impressive.
Ooh, I think the longest one that I found was 82 minutes.
80. Yeah, so I saw 73. I saw something around 80, so it's around that.
That's like the upper. Yeah, that's like the record, I think.
Yeah, exactly. And they dive on of depths up to 200 to 400 meters is common, but they can go up to 600 meters. So that's like 1,800 feet, right? If I did the math right.
Yeah, I think the one that I was reading was saying they can reach depths of over 1,950 feet.
Okay, yeah, so right about that, yeah.
So, just, yeah, right around there. Yeah, it's deep.
And the dives are usually about 15 minutes commonly, but they have documented that they can return to a small air hole that they probably created themselves in the ice after traveling almost 3 kilometers away.
Whew, wow.
Yeah. So they can swim 3 kilometers, I guess, and then go back 3 kilometers. So it's a 6-kilometer round trip. If I read that right, and this is 3 kilometers total. Either way.
Yeah, either way, that's a pretty fast swim.
Yeah, that's a pretty fast swim, and being able to hold your breath for however long it is. So that is what I have for diet and behavior. Okay. So there's these pretty cool animals. So we're going to take a quick break, and then we will come back with the status and the threats, and then some the newer research that's been happening. And I'll get into that cool study that's been done down by McMurdo, which is pretty awesome. So we will be back after a quick break. And we're back. Thanks for coming back with us. Kat, let's get into the status.
Yeah, so the status is going to be pretty quick on these guys. So they are an IUCN species of least concern, meaning that we think that their population is pretty healthy and doing well, and we're not really too worried about them being threatened or going extinct anytime soon, which is great. And in terms of population estimates, the best estimate I could find was around 800,000 seals around the Antarctic continent. But Cindy, I know you're going to be sharing a little bit more about that with us in the new research.
Yes, and the number is not that number at this point, but ooh, just last year. So yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, because that's the thing, right? Is like you have to bear in mind that a lot of these population estimates, it takes a long time to actually gather all of the information required to publish those. So even by the time they're published, they're usually at least 2 or 3 years out of date by that point. And if you can imagine trying to do population surveys in the Antarctic of seals, you kind of get an idea that like this might not be the easiest thing in the world to do. So I'm curious to see what that new information is.
And most of those are based on like small scale field studies that you're then
you're extrapolating
together, extrapolating. Yeah. And so the new study is using new technology, and it's very cool.
Cool. Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm excited for that.
Teaser.
So in terms of our threats, so first of all, we'll talk about active hunting. So in the past, Weddell seals have been protected from commercial hunts by really just their inaccessibility. Right. Which again, like Cindy was saying, like it's the same, whether hunting from humans or hunting from other animal species, being down in the Antarctic is actually kind of a benefit. There were many killed in the past to provide food for sled dogs. Obviously, this is not continued anymore. We're typically not using sled dogs in the same way anymore. All killing of seals in the Antarctic region is now regulated by the Convention for the Conservation of Antarctic Seals, which is kind of interesting, and the Antarctic Treaty. However, one source I found did note that a commercial hunt of 107 Weddell seals was carried out by the Soviet Union between 1986 and 1987. Not sure why. They didn't really say. That was the only information I found, but it was obviously of note where they were killing, they killed quite a few seals.
Right.
And that was, I'm not sure when this treaty was enacted. I'm not sure if that was in violation of the treaty or not, but obviously that was a big enough number to be noteworthy.
Right.
because
And
they're not
the
really
treaty,
typically
I'm
killed.
assuming because nobody owns Antarctica, where it's a treaty for like everybody saying this is how we are all going to manage it. So you don't have a
Right.
tragedy commons where one group is doing one thing, another group's doing another thing, and then it messes everything up. So
Exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
So while we're talking about active killing, getting back to predation, so as we alluded to earlier, really the main two predators of Weddell seals in the Antarctic are killer whales and leopard seals. Leopard seals are typically preying on the pups, which would make sense. Leopard seals are very large seals. If you have not listened to any of our episodes where we talk about leopard seals or look them up online, feel free, because they're kind of gnarly looking and they're pretty massive.
They're like reptiles in seal skin.
They're crazy, but they are typically preying on the pups, and then obviously the Antarctic killer whales are mammal eaters as well. So at least some of them. So
and I would just think when I heard the killer whales, I'm like, oh, it's the Antarctic ones because they have the tiny little white patches that are so small that makes them look like the beady little eyes, and you're just like,
I will say they're more sinister looking than the other orca ecotypes. Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
I mean, it's unfortunate for them just because it's not their fault and it's just the way that their eye patches are. But like, it's really like we're just
yeah. So those guys are really the only two predators. Like I said, we are in the Antarctic, so we don't have as many land-based predators as we would in somewhere like the Arctic, where you're dealing with Arctic foxes or polar bears or other land-based predators. So the Weddell seals are fairly, relatively speaking, safe from predation for the most part.
Yeah.
In terms of some slightly less direct impacts and threats, disturbance is actually one that is currently of concern due to their, as you mentioned, due to the proximity to these research bases in the Antarctic and their basically lack of fear of people. So as more and more people are able to access the Antarctic, are coming down to do research, as our technology improves and we're able to spend more time down there, all of that will be creating more and more disturbance for these animals. And actually, interestingly enough, in 1998, the Environmental Protection Protocol was added to the Antarctic Treaty and was ratified to start to implement environmental measures, for example, like banning any mining or oil drilling in the Antarctic for at least 50 years. And they also banned any refuse disposal and use of pesticides in the region. So again, like you said, just really trying to proactively implement some of these things that we know have created major issues around the rest of the world in this area that is relatively pristine for the moment because humans aren't there, basically.
And I randomly heard on the radio station of somebody who was going to be a janitor in McMurdo for calling the radio station. Yeah, and she goes around and just does random different jobs. She's like, oh, I'm going back to the Antarctic for my first winter. And I was like, oh my God. But she was mentioning that like it's you take everything in, you take everything out, right? There's nothing can be left there. Everything has to be brought back. So it's very kept clean that way.
Yeah, exactly. On that note, speaking of things being clean, obviously as a top predator with a very thick blubber layer, Weddell seals are susceptible to contaminant accumulation over time, just like all of the other marine mammals that we've discussed in the past who they store these toxins in their blubber layer. If they become nutrient depleted or if they start to starve for any reason and they're metabolizing that fat, they are then dosing themselves with contaminants. I believe they are at a slightly lower risk than a lot of other species, again, because the Antarctic system is at the moment relatively pristine compared to most of the world. I mean, that's obviously not that it's super clean, but it's way more
one of the most pristine places left.
Yeah, again, because we don't have a big human presence there.
Yes.
But obviously, just as a top predator and marine mammal, they are accumulating those contaminants over their lifespan as well. And as we've talked about with all other ice-related species, climate change is one of the major concerns for this species. Obviously, again, reductions in sea ice having that direct impact where it's reducing these areas where the animals can haul out and rest. Indirect in terms of changing or reducing prey that's available, changing the impacts on the predators who are then potentially foraging more on Weddell seals because their other prey are depleted. So it really is an ecosystem-wide concern when we're talking about climate change. And obviously for any of these species that are strongly related to ice layers and ice percentages down there, and especially like you said, if that has a social component too, where they're utilizing different areas of the ice depending on their season in life and the season of the year, any shifts in that ice are going to have major implications for their population in time. So not terrible for the threats. It's not as like devastating and dire as sometimes, which is kind of nice to start the new year where it's like, okay, these guys are actually doing okay compared to a lot of other species, which is nice to hear. So that was all I had for the status and the threats. Do we want to do fun facts now, or do we want to do new research?
You go ahead, because I think I already talked to the two that I had, and the other one I have will go with one of the research I'm doing. So
okay, I just had a couple. So firstly, just to sometimes, when we do have good estimates of their lifespan, we like to throw those in there. So they typically live between 25 to 30 years on average.
Pretty typical seals.
Pretty typical for seals, but also pretty long lived for, for seals that are obviously predated. I think that's pretty standard for seals. You were talking about their excellent eyesight, and I thought it was really fun that they have a membrane that actually can come down and cover their eyes that protects them from blowing snow and salt in the ocean.
Ooh.
Yeah, which I thought was neat. And I thought specifically with the snow, where you're thinking about the Antarctic and they have these gnarly storms that whip up around there, and just like that makes total sense, right? These guys are hauled out on the ice, and having that ability to actually like close that membrane, protect their eyes from the snow, but still be able to see.
It's almost like
it's like snow goggles.
The nictating membrane for reptiles, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I thought that was really.
I did see something, one comment somewhere that said they do avoid blizzards. I don't know how much they do to avoid blizzards, but if they
right, I mean, they might try to just go underwater and pop up for air periodically rather than waiting it out on land. But I thought that was cool.
That's pretty cool.
And then in terms of their name, because obviously Weddell seal is a little bit random. So they are actually named after Captain James Weddell, who wrote about his encounters and illustrated the seals in the 1820s when he was down there on the path of discovery. So that was pretty cool.
You imagine being down there in the 1800s,
right? With your wooden boat that you like cross the oceans. I mean, I can, and I'm very grateful that I don't have to. Let's put it that way.
Like you get to that one.
Yeah.
But you do cool stuff like that, facts. Then you get a seal named after. So.
I mean, there is that. But yeah, I just thought it was neat. Actually, it was also accompanied by some really great illustrations apparently, and makes sense if, like you said, if they are fairly, not friendly, but if they're not necessarily afraid of humans, like you would, again, as a naturalist, be able to get some really incredible observations. Just sitting on your ship, right? Just observing animals who are moving around. So thought that was very, very cool.
Yeah. I think that's one of the kind of more fun things about them is that they just don't care because they're not used. There's no predators there, so they don't have to be afraid of things. So
well, and especially there's like we've several times mentioned now, like there's no real land-based predators. Like that's the thing. So if they're in the water, it might be different. But if being on land, they're like, well, anything on land is just a penguin. Here comes a very tall penguin. Like, oh, you can be over there, I don't care. Yeah, so kind of neat.
Yeah, for sure.
Those were all of my fun facts.
Cool, those are good ones. Okay, so I'm going to get into that research. So I will have a link to this. It's called Weddell Seal Science, and it is the Weddell Seal population dynamics that they've been looking at. They have the website is some cool educational stuff. There's a 3-minute video of with some of that stuff I was talking about earlier, and the researcher that's out there right now. So check that out. But they are intensively studied in Erebus Bay, which is eastern McMurdo Sound. At the southern extent of the Ross Sea, and that's been going on since 1968.
That's awesome. That's when isn't that when they established that station?
Possibly. I don't know. I didn't look up when McMurdo had begun.
Okay. Let me see if I can without interrupting the internet.
So as she's looking that up, they have more than 28,000 marked individuals in there.
Wow.
Yeah, over those decades.
Yeah, McMurdo was established in December 1955.
Okay, so shortly, 10 years after they started doing that.
Makes sense.
So, yeah. And as we said before, the Ross Sea, they will commonly say like it's a great area because they can study these marine mammals long term, and it's one of the most pristine places left on the planet. So it's really good to look at the interactions between ecology and foraging and animals and everything. Mm-hmm. So every pup that's been born since 1973 in the study area has been tagged.
Wow.
Crazy.
That's insane.
Yeah. So, and because they are highly philopatric, so that they remain where they started off, 80% of the seals are marked, and more than 65% of the individuals are marked and of known age.
Wow,
So
that's
they
so
have
cool.
they have a huge amount of information about these individual seals. And we've talked before about what long-term data can do. And you can go back and look at, changes in each year, and then like how many pups were there, how many were they born, when they first started having babies, all this kind of stuff you can look back at, even if you're not looking at it right at the moment.
Well, and the cool thing with having such a detailed data set like that too is that you can look at environmental fluctuations because you
Right.
have this long data set. So you can look at years where it was warmer than other years, just
Mm-hmm.
there's naturally occurring cycles that the Earth goes in, and then compare that to, you know, more recent years and how things are warming more rapidly, and actually look at, okay, if it's a natural warming cycle, how does this impact them versus this very unnatural warming cycle that we are now in? So yeah, that's
Exactly.
super cool.
Yeah, and they can compare like from 1968 versus 2020, like what's going on, the
Wow,
difference between that. So it's
that's awesome.
very, very cool. That's like what we all aspire to, right? To have that many seals, that many individuals documented and know everything about them. So it's pretty cool. So they can easily, like in that little video too, you can watch them like just like walk up to the seal, and mom's just kind of like, all right, whatever you're doing. And so what's interesting too is, so they look at variation in annual reproduction and abundance and population composition, just like we were talking about. You can relate those to environmental stuff. So if you want to know how to weigh, because they do a lot of weighing, right? How much the female weigh, how much does the baby weigh when they're born versus when they're weaned? How do you weigh a seal? Well, I'll tell you. The pups, they put in a duffel bag. So it's like they sneak up and like they're like, and take them off. Put a duffel bag, and then they have the spring scale. So you have two people that are holding each side, and then they lift the seal up, and then it weighs it once it's off the ground. And so that's good for the younger ones. They're about 50 to 80 pounds when born. And then, like I said, they could be close to 200 or 300 by the time they're weaned. And we saw them actually do this for the elephant seal up here. So a couple people can pull that 200 or 300 pounds up to weigh it. But the females, how do you do that? Well, they can either estimate the mass by taking pictures, which is the most non-invasive way. But apparently they're so kind of docile, they can coax them onto a cow weighing platform.
Wow.
They're just like, come on, you go over here.
Oh my gosh. That's
And what's
crazy.
interesting too is in the video they show the female, they're trying to weigh the pup, and so there's another person with a big stick that's like sticking it's like got little something on the end of it that's kind of bright, whatever, sticking it in front of the female's face so she doesn't like distracted, like, don't look at what we're doing to your pup, everything's fine here. And then they just do the seal, and then they let it out, and everybody's fine.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's pretty cool, interesting. So I would highly check out that that website. I'll put that up. Now onto the population stuff. Now, because they've had this long running station there, and then there's other smaller groups around the Antarctic that are doing other locations. But in 2020 and 2021, these are two papers. Basically, they're using crowdsource image and using satellite imagery. So it's kind of, we talked about with counting the seals, and I forgot which seal it was, but you could volunteer to go on and count the seals in pictures, satellite pictures.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Okay, got it.
Yeah, so they had more than 325,000 citizen scientists that searched 790 VHR images, covering 268,000 basically square kilometers of fast ice. And
so they're taking the pictures as part of their study, and then they're putting them online, and then random people can go on and count seals for a certain amount of them. Okay, yep. Got it. Cool.
So it's that crowdsourcing, right? So now you have all these people looking at it, and then they have algorithms that rank the searches to the degree their votes corresponded with others, so there's a measure of relative quality, and to filter out any unreliable searches that somebody's just like, there's 1,000 seals here, and they were all rocks, So it was the important. They did highlight the importance of training to be able to tell the difference between seals and rocks. So you do need to do that. Because there was a high amount of false positives, but not false negatives. So it's more likely people go, there's a seal there, when it was actually a rock.
Got it.
But they were able to train to do that. And so in that study, they found that there was only 0.55% of available maps had seals on them.
Wow.
Really small amount, right? So very sparse and irregular distribution on the fast ice.
Interesting.
Yeah. So they have these little hot spots, and that's where they all congregate. Which, I mean, I don't know why. Can't ask them, I guess. So moving on. So from that, the second article, it came out in 2021, and this was the first global population estimate. So again, before everything was based on these tiny little, small studies. This one, they were able to take pictures all across the continent because of the satellite. Yay. And they used they compared with the research from the Weddell Seal study to validate the satellite imagery counts, right? So they know how many are there, and then they can see, well, how many did you count, in these images, and be able to basically ground truth that they were correct. And so they did that. They did the crowdsourcing, and then they used habitat modeling to make the first global population estimate. So what was interesting is that before 800,000 was the previous estimate based on all those other work. They estimated only 202,000.
Wow, that's huge.
Huge difference, right?
Interesting.
And so it basically kind of emphasizes like maybe we don't know as much as we think we do about these distributions and how difficult it is to put these little ones together to estimate these larger population things. And we can do it now better with this cool new imagery. The resolution was down to 30 to 50 centimeters, which is about the size of a seal head. So it's really high quality pictures.
Yeah.
So the other thing that they found was that the land fast ice was important in seals distribution, right? We knew that. But there was, again, talking about the climate change and differences between years on Victoria Land, which I think is a great name. Victoria Land. There was a hot spot that had about 2,000 animals in the 1970s. There was 4 in 2018.
Wow.
Yeah. So seals are moving south as ice habitat is disappearing, which is what we alluded to earlier. Right? Because it's a little bit more northerly area there. They're also more likely to be found near glaciers because the pressures of the glacier makes cracks in the ice, so the seals can go in and out and have air holes. And also shorelines for similar reasons, and then next to deep water because they have those rich fish populations, or fosh, as I was saying before. And so with glaciers receding, that may impact their distribution, right? So they're going to be receding farther inland. Are they going to follow them, or are they going to go, elsewhere, along with the ice disappearing? So both interesting points from that cool image study. So moving on to diving, they like to attach cameras to the seals, and most of these they like glue on and they fall off at some point. So they're not on. The seals do not have a camera on their heads for the rest of their lives, so don't worry about that. But they did. They documented 4 different types of dives. A foraging dive, which was medium duration with a deep, steep ascent and descent. So they dive down and then they dive straight up. A second one that was short, low-speed, non-linear dives close to the hole, the breathing hole, and they think that's for guarding the hole. Basically, this is my air hole, not your air hole. And response, a detection of another seal. So they might go away from my territory. The third dive was in the middle of short and low and long and high speed, but they didn't really describe it much else in the abstract that I read. And the fourth one was a longer high-speed linear dive, but shallow compared to foraging dives. And that's the one that ranged as much as 3 kilometers from a hole. And so the third and fourth dives they think are more exploratory, like they're going to check out their environment and maybe find a new hotspot to eat. They did show that they compared with previous classifications of what dives were, and they found that some were the same, but some were not. So it really showed how adding behavioral data, having the video of what they're doing compared with just the time and date report, time and depth recording, is really important to accurately describe what the animals are doing. If you just have the time and depth, and that you're guessing kind of exactly what's going on. But with the video, they can show that more. They showed that in another study in 2004, there's a additive cost for foraging. So they looked at oxygen consumption in foraging versus non-foraging dives, and they used video again. And so the locomotion cost for diving increased with the number of strokes taken. So every time they stroke, it's more work, which makes sense. But the seals, foraging dives with seals eating the Antarctic silverfish had a 44.7% increase in recovery oxygen consumption. So basically, because they're digesting that warm prey as they're diving, that's added work. So there's more energy expended in digestion while they're diving.
Got it.
So it's adding to the locomotor and basal costs of diving. So they need to do it to eat, but it's also it's higher energy to do it.
Yeah.
So they better get the food that they need. So then in 2013, they did one on Adelie Land. I don't know why everything's called something land down there, but almost all of them are. They had 6 seals with data loggers, 20,400 dive profiles. And they basically dived deeper and longer with increased foraging at night compared to the daytime. During winter, they spent more time at the shallow dives with the smooth bottom, basically, bathymetry. And they favored enriched, warmer, and less dense water masses, feeding mainly on Antarctic silverfish. And they're tracking basically the diel, the day-night migrations of those fish, and foraging in places where they're likely to be found. The last 2 I have to do with reproduction. We're going to end on a good note for these guys. There was an influence of maternal mass. So females weighing more than 355 kilograms, which is like 700-800 pounds, right? It's like 2.2 pounds per kilogram, I think. So the females who weighed more than that were able to do a longer lactation, right? They had more energy reserves to get to them because the females lose a massive amount of weight during lactation. But there was no relationships for the lighter females. So they basically, it was like 33 days for lactation and they couldn't do anything more than that. And there was a positive relationship between postpartum mass, so how big the females were after giving birth, and then how much the pup was able to gain, right?
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. And so again, the fatter the pups are, the more likely they're going to survive their fasting period. So fatter females are better than not. But in 2006, they found also that there was a variation in the probability of first reproduction. So the first time they give birth. So again, all these were basically done in or near McMurdo. And they had 4,965 females of known age, which is
that's wild to have that many.
It's a massive data set.
Like, so cool.
Right? And in the freaking Antarctic. So, like we have ones in the tropics that we don't have information like this on. So the mean year of the first time they had babies was about 7.62 years. But that's older than those in northerly locations. So the higher up in the, I guess, more warmer areas, it was starting at 4 to 5 years. So it takes a little bit longer when they're in the colder areas. But it varied from 4 to 14 years. That's pretty large variance. And so there was individual heterogeneity, right? So there's individual variation on when it happens. Okay. And likely has to do with how big they are and what food they're getting. The best model, the probability of breeding for the first time varied by age and year, and the amount of annual variation varied with age. So there's just a lot of variation is basically what that's saying. But they did affirm that the age at first reproduction so basically this affirmed that the age at first reproduction in a long-lived mammal will be sensitive to environmental variation, right? Okay. So if they have enough food, they're going to be able to start having babies earlier. If they don't, it's like you said before, those different years, right? So if food's really low that year, the average first time they have babies is also going to be low. Mm-hmm. And if they have more food. So what this means, the happy part is the evolution, what that means is that this variability suggests that they can display this flexibility to maximize reproductive output under good environmental conditions. So basically they can wait until it's really good and then they can go hog wild and have a bunch of babies. So that's good for them in terms of especially climate change and the increased variability that we're going to be seeing in the next, however many years. Mm-hmm. They may be able to deal with it better than other species that are more tightly regulated and when they're able to have babies and stuff.
Yeah.
So
cool.
So that's it for these guys. There are less of them than we thought there were, but they do have things going for them on being able to be flexible with what's happening. But we do want to try to stop. The polar regions are going to be more affected and affected quicker for climate change than other areas. So that's why there's kind of a hotspot for researching that kind of stuff. So that's it for the Weddell seal. Thank you guys so much for picking it this time. And remember, I will have those links to the sounds. Please check them out, or just like Google Weddell seal sounds, because they're one of the strangest.
They're so cool.
Yeah, very cool. So next time we'll probably have a journal review. Again, if you have any anything you want us to talk about, let us know. Email us or catch us on social media. And don't forget our merch store on our website. You can get a link there with our cool merch. I have a shirt on right now, but I'm not going to show you because it will look weird because I'm sitting down. But we have a lot of cool merch there. And again, all the funds for either this, that, or the subscription that you choose to do for the podcast go back to doing our research and education initiatives. So we appreciate all your support, share and like as well. And with that, we will see you next time. Bye.
Bye.
This was brought to you by Pacific Mammal Research, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To learn more about the species we discuss, check out our blog. Head to our website, www.pacmam.org, that's PACMAM.org, to check it out. Also, help us continue providing fun and educational content like this by donating today. Your help is how we can continue to do our work and share it with you. Thanks.